Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another week of Sticky Notes Chat. This is episode number 25, and this week we are talking about how to level up, how to get your. Oh, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking. I'm sorry, that was last week's. This week we're talking about tools. There's a lot of talk about which tool is the best tool to use for your job. So this week, Amanda and I are going to be talking about, well, is that even the right thing to be talking about, or is there something else that's more important, like your underlying skill set? Amanda will be here shortly. She's wrapping up with a participant and then rushing to come and join this session. So she will be with us as soon as she can. In fact, she's just joined now. Let me add her. There we go. Hi, Amanda. I was trying to cover for you, and then
Oh,
I had all sorts of problems because, like, I had the wrong thing up for what we're supposed to say and everything. So, luckily, Amanda's here to take control, and she is the one who's actually going to be. This is going live to her stream this week, so she's actually theoretically in control. Did you have time to grab something to eat and get yourself sorted out?
no, but it's fine. So,
Oh man.
user research pro tip. Maybe schedule more than 30 seconds between a user session and a live stream.
I wonder why that would be. So I also was running participants this morning for an interview, a set of interviews I was doing. But yeah, I was the smart one, and I actually got mine finished half an hour ago. So yeah,
Yeah.
but good
Best
job.
laid
It's lovely. Yeah, lovely
plans.
to have you here. As you can tell, these live streams are really live, unscripted. Amanda, did you know what we were talking about this week?
Tools. We're talking about
Yes.
tools. One of my favorites.
So I was just doing the intro, and I hadn't said who we are or what we're doing. So let me. Do you want to carry on and do that for us?
Oh, sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda. Amanda Stockwell, and I'm here with Chris Notter. Cory's not here today, but we are the Sticky Notes chat crew. So, as you have probably heard, if you are tuning into us live now or watching this later, Chris, Cory, and I are three UX research consultants talking about getting stuff done. And the three of us teach on LinkedIn, and we get kind of questions sourced to us all the time about all kinds of different stuff. So, we have been picking from topics that we get asked about a lot to discuss amongst ourselves so that we can have some conversations and have some resources to point people to. So today's topic is tools. So very frequently we get asked things, and it often sounds like a definitive question. People are like, what tools should I use? What's the best one for research or the best one for visual design? And since it's a common topic, we thought that we would bring that up. But so if you've got questions, please go ahead and ask them in the live stream chat. We are happy to do that. Or you can always, kind of find us on our website later. You can follow us on LinkedIn, or you can ask us questions on Twitter, all of the above. But for today, if you've got questions, please kind of put them right in the live stream, and hopefully, theoretically, assuming everything is working correctly, they will show up for us and we will be able to answer them in real time.
Oh, technology.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All right.
Okay, deep
Let's
breath.
so let's hop in. So, Chris, I know that this is something I get asked all the time. Actually, I think this is kind of a common question across all the buckets of UX, but it seems like especially this year with research and everybody going remote, everybody seems to want to have a golden answer. Like, what's the one I should buy? What's the one I should download? And I'm going to do my standard sticky notes chat early today. I don't know. It depends. And so let's kind of break that down. But one thing I want to kind of lay the foundation of, and Chris, I'm curious your thoughts on this, but we've talked about it a little bit. One of the great but also really hard things about UX is that it's not about the tool that you use. It's about the methods that you use, and it's about the kind of knowledge that you have coming in with it. So it's really pretty likely that there are 5 or 6 or 10 or more different types of tools you could use to do the same kind of work and get comparable results. And some might be better for you based on your the way your work is set up, the way your teams are set up, where you're located, what your goals are, what your budget is, what your resources are. There's almost never one right answer. Hot take. Sorry, not sorry. So Chris, thoughts? Do you immediately, like, what's your gut reaction when I say that? Because sometimes I say that and people cringe.
It, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, okay, I'm going to sound like a dinosaur. Well, I am a dinosaur. So, but I've been in this field for a lot of years now. And um, am I using any of the same tools that I was using when I started? Nuh-uh.
Oh,
Am I using any of the same skills from when I started? Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, there's always this rule of thumb I have about any one tool, which is it will do 80% of what you want it to do at the time. And then there's another tool that's comparable to it that will do 80% of what you want to do. And they're different 80%. And so sometimes it's not one tool. Sometimes you need different tools in order to be able to do what you want to do. If there's a particular thing you needed and the tool you normally use doesn't do it, then you need to use a different tool. But tools are just tools. They're just things. I mean, um, it's there are some tools. If you think about physical tools, there are some tools I have right now, like wrenches and stuff, which were my grandfather's wrenches. Right? They've stood the test of time because we're still trying to do the same thing with them as we did before. They're high quality tools. They work fine. There's other stuff where they haven't stood the test of time. Either they weren't high enough quality tools. I mean, a lot of the tools we use are pretty bleeding edge because we're trying to get something done, and it's like, oh, as soon as something better comes along, I'm just going to abandon this and come up with and use something which actually is stable and doesn't crash on me halfway through a session or whatever. Um, but there's other ones where they become obsolete if we stop doing certain things, certain techniques, then those tools aren't useful anymore. Or but my skill set, that's very different. Each of those tools is a way of augmenting my skill set. So allow me to reach further into like a tool that lets me do remote sessions, allows me to reach more participants. It's augmenting my skill set of running usability studies. It's not a new thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, tools.
Tools, Matt. All right. Well, so it sounds like, for the most part, that we agree that it's more about kind of the background skill set than any
Mm.
particular tool. That being said, even after I nicely explain that to people, when they ask me what sort of tool they should use, they kind of look at me and go, okay, but what are you using right
Yeah,
now? Because you must have something, which is a fair point. That's valid. So I think one of the things, sticky notes, post-its. So I was going to say, so one of the things that I like to remind people is that the old standbys almost never go out of style, but there might be different ways that you end up using them. So to your point, you just held up a stack of sticky notes and a pen. The sessions that I'm running
and
this
these are
week.
those stupid ones that are supposed to go in a container, so it's great, isn't it? You go to the store, you're late, you grab a set of sticky notes, you go into the client meeting, you go, okay, let's get things written on the. Oh crap, I got the wrong ones. Yeah, we're-
That's true. So like I guess it goes without saying that we are all a fan of sticky notes, given that we named our chat
yeah,
after sticky notes. I think sticky notes might be the only tool that will never go away.
yeah, yeah.
That
But
and a
it's
marker.
also my background. It's my go-to tool because so even in these remote times, people are saying, okay, so which tools are you using for doing facilitation? Sticky notes. It's like the. You can do an awful lot. Okay, there are some specific tools out there which really help, and I mean, there's some ways of digitizing the output which really work for some people, but they also can stifle a bunch of creativity. So I still like using paper and pens and stuff during remote sessions and getting people to literally, hold them up to the screen, or take photos with their phones and share those in a digital space. Sorry, I mean, I derailed us a bit, but I was on my sticky notes rant, I guess.
All right. So Chris is making a claim that post-it notes and paper and pen are the best tools of all time. I think that that's fair.
They're not
um,
always sufficient.
yeah. Well, and so let's talk about that. So one of the things again to kind of remind people of that I think is important to keep in mind is that no matter what you're doing, you have to think about the context that you're working within. What kind of people are you talking to, and what might be comfortable for them? If you're running a remote session with designers and engineers, they might be really used to using like online whiteboards and, kind of notes that, kind of all these kind of digital tools. But if you are interviewing elderly people or people with really different backgrounds who have no real technical expertise or who don't have a computer, it might be a struggle to even get them on a video chat, right? So the first thing I kind of want to remind people of is, and again, it sounds so simple, but like first, think about who you're talking to. Think about who your user and your audience is. And that's true both for most important for the participants if you're running research, but also for your stakeholders. Recently, to your exact note about writing notes, in a couple of months ago, time doesn't mean anything anymore. I'm not exactly sure when it was. Sometime recently, I was participating in, sort of a concepting sketching exercise. Now, traditionally, this would have been done in a studio with Post-it notes and stickers and with a whiteboard and a facilitator, and we would have all been there together, and there would have been a nice icebreaker exercise. And instead, we were all at home. We were on a video call. One person couldn't find any paper, so she was using like the back of a piece of mail, which counts. It's still paper, but she didn't have, like we had folded paper into quarters so that we could each have kind of the same size. And so the thing is just to kind of think about who needs to participate and what do they really actually need to get done to participate. Like, is it really important that you actually see their sketch, or is it most important that you can see it later but have the conversation with them to get their feedback about what you're actually doing? And it really just depends on what you're trying to get out of it. In that particular circumstance, it was basically a brainstorming meeting. We were trying to come up with ideas, and it wasn't really that important that our stakeholder drew we saw the exact stick drawing of what she was trying to communicate. What mattered is that we were having the conversation about her ideas and our ideas and kind of mutually getting feedback. And there were a couple of things that right away they were like, we know we can't do that, so let's not test it, right? And there were a couple of things that we were like, we've done research on that before, it didn't go over so well. And that was the important part, was that conversation. But in other instances, you need other things. So the first thing I'll say, and whether this is in person or remote, the first thing you need to think about is who's going to participate and what are they going to be able to reasonably do.
And there's a corollary to that, which is I see an awful lot of tools out there which are trying to emulate a physical process. So there's a lot of tools which have digital sticky notes. And there's a lot of tools which let you do digital sketches for ideation. A lot of the wireframing tools, for instance. But they're taking what's a physical thing and putting it in the digital realm. Now that's great if, like you say, all of your participants are technologically able to do that. But even I struggle sometimes to make those little damn sticky notes. If I want to move it, it lets me edit it. If I want to edit it, it lets me move it. It's like, oh come on, really? It's like it's actually turned a low fidelity exercise into a high fidelity exercise without actually giving you any more fidelity. It's giving you more stress without actually giving you anything additional that you can do with it. So any of those kind of tools, do you really need them? I don't know. Yes, it gives you a way of recording the exercise for later, but like you say, that's not normally the point. The point isn't to record what actually got written. It's what happened while you were doing it. So I guess then the next thing is, what's your motivation? What are you trying to do? So who's your audience, but what's your motivation? Because if you need to record it for later, sure, maybe a digital thing is a good way of doing it. But there's other ways of doing that. Using a cell phone to take a picture is a way of recording it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, all right. So, well, basically all that we have discussed so far is that tools are really not that important, but, but the one thing I will say is that, especially when you're doing remote work, it's helpful to have options, right? Yeah. So for instance, for that same kind of activity where you're brainstorming, I've done now a couple of similar things, and it's been helpful when we've had options for the way that people think differently or can communicate differently, right? Like, so some people were typing notes and sending us descriptions in copy. Some people were sketching things and sending us pictures. Some people were, we were, in that case, I was talking to a couple of designers. They were proficient enough in the design tools that they were using to quickly kind of use some iconography to communicate their ideas. And one thing that I think is especially pertinent with kind of remote research, but is always true, is that people think and process differently. And so providing for ways for people to do that differently, while yes, if you're doing a mind mapping exercise, it's useful if everybody's on the same medium, that providing some flexibility for people to be able to communicate and to process in the ways that make sense to them absolutely is helpful. And if you're unsure, err on the side of planning for more and not using it. Because I've never planned for something and been like, oh, too bad we didn't use that. But I have been like, man, I really wish I'd thought of that earlier.
Yeah. Although one thing I will say, I'm not sure if you ever experienced this, when the designers in the room whip out their super awesome design skills and everybody else is like, oh, well, I guess I won't be sketching then because my stick figures don't really look good up against what this person just created. Have you ever noticed that kind of intimidation factor?
100%. And to be frank, I am one of those people. I cannot draw I can barely draw a straight line, truthfully.
So if I've just spent 10 minutes doing a drawing exercise to get people confident enough to put pen on paper, the last thing I want is some designer coming in and go, oh, blah, 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 blah. Here, I just designed our whole thing for us. Yeah. So I often like to constrain people to the same medium in those kind of environments so that my designers don't scare everybody else off. And sometimes there's benefits and constraints. If you're constraining people to, for instance, I do have a Sharpie here, I'm not going to go grab it, but big fat pens, it's a way of making sure that your designers don't go overboard with their thank you. Well, it's funny, I do that these days because in the UK I don't think we even had the Sharpie brand. So when you say Sharpie, everybody's
permanent marker.
Permanent marker, yes, that's the generic term, like sticky notes rather than post-it notes, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's having that big fat pen means the designers can't go overboard with their detailed sketches, and they're kind of reduced to the same thing as everybody else. So it's like it's a leveler, it's a constraint. But like you say, having those constraints can stop some people from contributing in the way that they best prefer to. There are some people who can't think in drawings, they think in prose instead. So having a way to think in prose is useful for them, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And so with that, let's also talk about, and I know I don't want to just talk about remote because I actually think this is a relevant conversation.
It's on everybody's minds now, but it's not the only thing in our lives, right?
But remote is big. But I think that when it comes to research in particular, the most important thing is to be able to have a meaningful way to kind of gather the feedback from people, a meaningful way to capture your notes, which again could be pen and paper. It could be, I've particularly liked lately, I've been recording all of my sessions and using the transcripts.
Yes.
That's my favorite. I highly recommend that to people.
So what tool do you use for your transcripts? It's like
Well, there's a couple of different ones that are great. I think it sort of depends, again, what you're trying to do. Yeah, that's my standard response. It depends. But, and full disclosure, like I know some of the people at some of these tools, so whatever. But so lately I've been using a tool called Tetra. It'll upload, it transcribes everything. You can do tagging. So Tetra Insights is what it's called. So it'll give you the transcription and you can do the tagging, and you can, from searching from words, you can pull video clips, which I hate doing the traditional way. So, so I've been using that a lot. There's a dozens, I think, of other just like pure transcription services if all you need is like the pure content. I know Otter is another one that is pretty popular.
We'll put links to these in. I hate to do this because we just said, oh, tools aren't important, but I know we're going to get asked questions for these. So we'll put links for these on the stickynotes.chat site in this episode. So that don't go panicking about that. We will put links to them up there. Yeah,
but so I would say very so kind of maybe we should focus less on the individual ones, although we will post notes. Let's talk about sort of like the categories of tools that you might want in your toolbox, whichever one it is that you pick. So
Well, that's it. I mean, we do have tools, right? They change all the time, but there are categories. So
yeah.
yeah, and transcription. I mean, if you're doing formative research, especially, that
Hmm.
transcription tool is will make or break your research, your discovery process,
Hmm.
the hermeneutic analysis, whatever you want to call it. Um, because a good tool that lets you do tagging and pull themes together and stuff, man, so much better than just going through the text manually. Oh,
Hmm. Yes, 1,000%. Although I will say, I have in my, not recently, in a past life, I printed out transcripts of some interviews and we were using highlighters for different
yeah,
colors. And it was actually a super great visual
yeah,
of comparing, like my take on what were the key like highlights and my colleagues' takes on what were the key takeaways. Like a very visual, easy way to
yeah,
tell, like, huh, Amanda has a lot of blue, Frank has a lot of yellow. What's going on here? But that it kind of highlighted one of the really powerful benefits of doing that kind of research is that we each had different perspectives based on kind of what our background was and what we were paying most attention to in the sessions. And we kind of pulled related but kind of different angles of insights out. So I would say that one, it's incredibly helpful to have some sort of way to record the results,
mm,
whether that's if you're, running interviews, if you can record them, if you're doing usability tests, if you can record them. If it's something like a card sort and it's maybe not in person right now, but if it's like live online, some of the tools actually record the sessions for you. If you have that option, I always recommend it. Has always been worth the money to me, to be able to both record and then to be able to do like transcription.
yeah. It's funny. I'm a real cheapskate. I hate paying for these tools, but there are certain ones I would like. The ability to record sessions is key because you cannot take notes well enough during a session.
Yeah.
I never want to have to go back to the video and watch the whole thing again. So, because that's just so time consuming.
Hmm.
So anything that helps me do that. I did find recently a free plugin to Chrome that records the whole screen for you. So and it will record
Mm,
video sessions for you. So for
cool.
instance, if you are, it's not as automatic as when you're doing something with the built-in recording features of these products. So but if you've got no money and you still need to do the recording, that's still an option. Again,
Hmm.
okay, I'll put a link to that in the.
Well, and also, I know that at least if you've got a Mac, there's built-in screen recording
There is.
software.
One of the
So
problems with that is it doesn't always record the computer audio the way that you would like it to.
it's true.
Yes.
It's true.
It,
You
it
have to be careful about that. So here's maybe a big 2 cents, no matter what tool you use, test it before you have live
oh,
sessions so that so that you
no,
can
don't
figure
just
stuff
test
like that
it.
out.
Get familiar with it because
Mm.
the last thing you want to do as a facilitator of any kind of session is be hang on a minute, let me just get my medicine because it looks dumb. So you have to be familiar with your tool. I mean, at the very beginning of this session, I wasn't familiar with the tool. I put the wrong caption on the screen, and that looks dumb enough. But it's like it. You have to be familiar with it. So yeah, don't use a tool for the first time in the first session you're running. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, or
Uh,
if you do, it's luck, and don't count on that in the future. Yeah. All right. So, well, and I guess actually maybe we should, before we get to the point about recording, you need to probably have a way to communicate,
yes.
and share screen or um, share something. I have done some, I guess, mobile ethnography is what it got called by the tool that I was using. I'm not sure if that's exactly the way to categorize it, but where I was seeing what they were recording on their camera, because in that case, it was important to me to see what their surroundings were, what their
Mhm.
context was. So again, think about kind of like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to learn about? And then picking a tool that works for that. So, you know, I've done a whole bunch of different things. You can do a whole bunch of different things, but the most common way to talk video conference wise is just some sort of way to share your screen and share your face. There's a bazillion of them. Zoom is
This is
having a year.
and this is the point, right? It's not that tool again is just facilitating the skills that you've got underneath. If you can't conduct a good interview, that tool's not going to make you a good interviewer. If you can't
That's so
conduct a
true.
good usability session, or you don't know how to write good tasks, especially good tasks that can be completed remotely,
Hmm.
it's not the tool's not. It doesn't matter whether you're using the best usability testing tool in the world or just the cheapest or free video conferencing software to do that remote session with. It's not going to make much difference.
Yeah.
You're still going to not get such good results as if you knew how the skills taken it would take to do it. Plus, once you know those skills, it helps you evaluate which tool you really need. Do you need all the bells and whistles one, or do you just need a more basic thing?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. To that exact note, one of the things that actually Cory was asking us about it in our like group chat the other day, um, tools for doing like live note taking and
Yes,
um,
yes.
being able to tag things live.
So
There's
yeah,
not a lot of great options. I'll say I haven't found one anyway. So if somebody has one, let me know. But the caveat to that is that I have noticed a trend in the last couple of years that a lot of the tools that used to be available monthly or at a per project basis are now being sold as annual subscriptions and targeted at enterprise customers,
yes,
which is
yes,
awesome if you're one of those enterprise customers. But if you
yes.
work at a much smaller team or you're a consultant or doing some freelance stuff, um, just kind of know you're going to have more limited options because some of these things are going to be price prohibitive. So,
Mhm.
you know, for instance, I've used UserZoom and it was really useful for a couple of things that we were doing it for. But the reason I was using it was because my client had a corporate account. I couldn't, I guess I technically could have, but I could not have justified paying for that kind of account for just myself.
Because you only
Um,
need it for that 1 month or 2 months, and then you don't need it for the rest of the year. So it feels wrong to be paying for it for the rest of the year.
yeah.
Right?
So, well, and also I didn't need it.
Yeah.
So just be on the lookout for that. But there
Mhm.
are a lot of these tools do have, um, kind of trials, and or if you sweet talk them, they might be willing to give it to you for just a little bit of time. Um, but
I'm not even seeing that many .edu discounts anymore. There used to be that if you could say you were a student and you were using this for a project, that you could get a good discount or a free trial. These days, some of the free trials are like, oh, you can run so card sorting. You can run three participants with 10 cards per participant. It's like, well, that's a trial in as much as it lets me work out with how to use the software. It's not a trial as in I can use it with a participant because I need way more participants and way more cards than that for my card
yeah,
sort. Yeah.
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 Yeah, so that's a good point. So I think so sort of categorically we have communication tools,
Mhm.
whether that's, a video conference tool, it could just be over phone, it could be, I've done like experience samples where I was having like text messages sent.
Yes.
You could do all kinds of stuff. But again, just kind of remember like whatever way you're communicating, you need it to be easy for the participant to do and easy for you to kind of gather all the information and keep track of it.
My favorite tools from a participant perspective are ones that don't require them to install anything. It happens in a browser window. If you can
Mm-hmm.
give somebody an instruction which is click this link and that's all they have to do, that's way better. The last thing I want to be doing is doing support for somebody who blames me for their computer blowing up because of the software you put on it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and actually, to that note, I would highly encourage people to look at tools that you already have access to
Mm.
and see if you can use those. So, for instance, in the sessions that I've been running today, we have a Google slide deck that I am sharing on my screen,
Mhm.
and I'm manipulating things on the Google slide deck.
Mhm.
Um, as the participant is talking to me. And to that exact point, they didn't have to download anything. They are not, you know, doesn't require any details. And they're tools that at least the group of people that I'm talking to are already familiar with.
Right.
Um,
I'm smiling because I was doing the exact same thing. I had
really?
some graphs with some dots over to the side, and I was asking people to put themselves on these axes of
Hmm.
skill sets and stuff, and just
Hmm.
move. I moved. They didn't even have to do it themselves. I'd say, okay, what do you think your numbers are, and I would drag the dot to the right place for them and stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, yes. It's a great way
Yeah.
of including visuals in what would otherwise be a non-visual conversation to draw out more information from people. Because the question, obviously, the next question is, so why did you put yourself at that level in the skill set? Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's like it's just a great yes. Those tools, it's already there. It's already on your computer or in your browser. It's something that you can just use.
Hmm.
I think people forget that. I talk to some colleagues. Uh, I don't know what do you call them. They're not colleagues. They're people who are also in a similar position to me, and they just talk about
Colleagues.
colleagues, the number of subscriptions they have on an annual basis. They've got Dropbox, they've got blah 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 blah, and all these other things to help them run their business, all this different stuff. And I'm thinking, man, I don't have any of those subscriptions. Am I doing something wrong? And I worked out, no, I'm not doing something wrong. It's just that I don't need that stuff to run my life. I don't need that stuff to be part of what I'm doing. So yeah, it's funny. I don't end up with that kind of those all those tools available to me because I'm just using basic stuff to get my work done. Again, maybe this is because I'm a cheapskate and I'm old and grumpy, but I haven't found the need.
Well,
Maybe one would be revelatory to me, and I'd be like, man, how could I ever live without this? But so far, I don't know.
well, and I'll go back to what I said, which is that especially if you are, working with participants, that typically the less somebody has to think about the tool that they're using, the more feedback they can give you about the questions that you're asking. So unless you are
Yeah,
testing the tool
yeah,
as part of your research session, which you may be, but unless you are testing the communication method, you want that to be as simple and worry-free as possible.
mhm,
So if somebody is worried about whether or not they can share their screen and they can't figure out how to get the microphone to work and all this other stuff, that's probably going to eat up a lot of time. So again,
yeah,
recommendation, leave yourself some extra time. But it also means that it's going to be harder for them to kind of get into the brain space of giving you feedback. It means it's going to be harder for them to think about the things that you really want them kind of giving you feedback on. So,
yeah.
so I would say kind of the simpler the tools, the better from a research perspective. Now, Chris, you and I both do mostly research, but I also know I have an awful lot of people who will reach out to me and be like, what prototyping tool do I need to learn this year? What prototyping program should I learn first in order to become a UX designer?
And I can be as grumpy as I want around this, but the problem is people need to be able to demonstrate these skills in order to get a job. So, my simple answer to that question, read what people are asking for job uh, in job descriptions, and then go learn that tool or go get familiar with a couple of those tools. I don't, it changes from year to year. Is it Balsamic this year or Mockingbird this year? Or is it Figma's now got all the stuff for doing, um, you know, wireframing? Or is it because there's wireframing tools, then there's prototyping tools. Now you're also talking about ones which automate the prototype so you can share it as an automated. I mean, that's the point. Then you're getting beyond what I would even care about because I don't do that in my work. I've never found a need to do automated prototypes with people. I'm happy to give them screen one on a piece of paper, then screen two on a piece of paper, or screen one on one slide of a slideshow, then screen two on the next slide of a slideshow. Low fidelity stuff doesn't need high fidelity tools around it. So anyway, bitching over. Go look. I can't stop myself, can I? Go look at what the job descriptions are asking for and learn one of those. It will change next year. It's kind of a pointless exercise, but yes, you need it to get the job. So get familiar with it. Go do a piece of work in it, even if it's just for yourself, so you can. All you need, little tip. All you really need to be able to do is say, yes, I have experience in this. I have done a piece of work in this. It doesn't have to have necessarily even been a piece of client work. Maybe you redo a piece of previous client work in a new tool, or you find a personal project you want to do, or you whatever it is. Do one of your student exercises in this particular tool rather than a different one. just to get some experience in being able to, enough experience to say, yes, I can work with this tool.
Well, and to that point, since Chris and I have both been in the seat of hiring people, and I have hired plenty of designers, here's what I'll say. It is often the specific tool is often stuck into a job description because that's what the rest of the team is using.
Yep.
However, if I interviewed somebody who is using, whatever, they're using InVision all of the time, but the rest of the team is working in Balsamic, which is actually also outdated. But anyway,
Yes.
whatever,
Sorry,
whatever,
I put that
whatever
word
it
in
is.
your mouth, right? It's funny,
Well,
that's got, yes, yeah.
yeah. Well, and the thing is, but it does depend also, like, the size of the organization or how tech savvy the organization is.
Right. Or whether they've got a site license for a certain thing. Are you using InVision or Sketch? I mean, and some of them, it's like, well, also if they've got their whole library in,
Right.
or Figma or Sketch, sorry, there's a better
Right.
comparison. If you've got your whole library created in Figma, then somebody else using Sketch, yeah, you can import and export, but there's always going to be some
It's a
clunkiness
pain.
about what you're doing. So,
Yeah.
but, and yes, they work differently, but they don't work that differently.
Well, so what I was going to say is that if I like your design work in Sketch, I trust that you'll be able to figure it out in Figma. So as a hiring person, it has never been a thing that has held me back, but it is useful. A lot of the times that gets stuck into a job description is because that's what the team is already using, and because there is, kind of, it can be messy to translate between back and forth. And so the most important piece for that, I would say, from a design perspective, is probably don't get super tied to a tool. Get tied to a design process. And what I care about is, can you lay out information in a way that is easy to read? Can you incorporate user feedback? Can you, appropriately apply design guidelines? Can you, whatever it is we're trying to do?
So you're talking about skills there. You're talking about skills, not tools.
Exactly. So the skill is what matters, but the tool, the reason just kind of the reason the tool often gets brought up is because it's usually what the team is already using. So to Chris's point, get yourself some familiarity with it so that you're not, totally over your head if you end up getting the job and working with them, so that you kind of know what's going on. You're familiar with the tool, but that doesn't mean, from a hiring perspective, I'm not assessing you on your ability to, use this to do the same function in Sketch versus Figma. I'm assessing your ability to lay out information or create color schemes or whatever it is that we're working on. So focus on those skills. But I would say also it's important to make sure that you, especially more on the design side, I think, than on the research side, make sure you pay attention to what the rest of the team is using, because it might matter in terms of how comfortable you are working with the rest of the team. And that's, frankly, if we're really talking about useful things, collaboration is probably more important than any other tool that you'll use. So that's my spiel for the day.
There is one issue around that, which is, I mean, I don't want anybody to lie on their resumes, but there is a lot of automated search stuff that happens before you even get to your resume being seen by a person. So it's possible that you will be passed over for a job because you use Figma rather than Sketch. For that reason, it's important to at least say, I have some familiarity with Sketch. What I would say is you need to be able to at least describe the differences between the tools. If you've given yourself that level of familiarity, like, okay, these palettes, the tool palettes that they put on the screen are different, but I know what each of these things does, and I know what their comparison is across, or I know the workflow that Figma encourages versus the workflow that Sketch encourages. I know how to create reusable objects in Figma. I know how to create reusable objects in Sketch. That's that kind of level of stuff. That's sufficient that you could at least say, yeah, I've got familiarity with it, and you could put it on your resume to then get through that automated process to be able to then talk to a person. And at that point, I think it's fair to say, I've got more experience with Figma. I've used Sketch. I wouldn't be upset using Sketch. Is that what your team uses? Is that the reason you were asking for this? Ask a question. They always love it when you ask questions.
Yes.
Why did you choose that one? Is there a particular reason? I mean, we're not getting into the sort of fanboy things here, like, well, I've always used Sketch because it's so much better than Figma. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess then my advice there for people when you're trying to figure out what tool to use is, kind of pay attention to what the team might be using, pay attention to what the benefits are, make sure you keep yourself abreast of what the kind of changes are, what the differences are, and teach yourself how to learn new tools. Don't get super tied to one specific design tool, because I've seen that really bite people. I knew someone who was, kind of building their career, doing pretty well, and was an information architecture / interaction design person, and got really attached to a specific set of tools that became outdated, and he was a little stubborn about it. It became pretty difficult for him to find a job because there weren't that many places that were still working with that. So again, much more important to know how to figure out new tools and be willing to learn new tools, but to have the background skill set kind of associated with it. So, okay, we have gone in a couple of directions, but here's what you need to know about tools. They are always going to change because technology is changing super rapidly. I always give this example, but I think it's a good one because everybody can connect to it. Think about the way in which you call somebody to talk to them.
Yeah.
I was not doing streaming like this last year. I was not using very much video conferencing 5 years ago. I had a cell phone, but it barely texted 10 years ago, right? So that's not very long in the realm of things, how fast things change.
There are people in the workplace here today who have never used a rotary dial phone.
Yeah.
So
yes,
that just shows you how technology changes over time. So yeah, it's going to change on you, but what doesn't change is your skill set.
Yes, absolutely. So learn those basic things. That said, we know that people are hungry for information about specific tools. So I was going to end today with going through kind of a high level category of the things that I use most from my toolkit. So, and by the way, if you are interested in remote research, my LinkedIn class on remote research just came out. So you should check that out too.
Oh, sweet. It's out now. Awesome.
Yeah, it just came out.
Amanda's class on remote research is now out. You should be watching that.
Yeah, you should check it out for more detail. But so at a very high level, here are some of the things that I use all the time. Okay, so a video conference tool. I happen to use Zoom. But here's the other thing. This is just like design tools. Actually, I use Zoom and 8x8 and GoToMeetings and WebEx. And now we're on live stream. And there are 5 or 6 different ones that I end up using because different clients use different things. Whatever. What's really important is for me to mostly be able to see somebody else's face and to be able to share screens with them. I very often end up using kind of, I guess we call them collaboration tools, but basically like Google Docs or, Microsoft has a version of this where multiple people can edit the same thing at the same time. It's a document that you can share. I use that all of the time in almost every context. I think it's super useful, but especially for research, like Chris and I were both saying today, we had, shared Google or, shared slides where we were moving stuff around as we were going. It's basic. Almost everybody has access to it, and it's really helpful.
My personal preference is for the Google ones over the Microsoft ones because they tend to work better for that collaborative element. It seems like it was bolted onto the Microsoft ones, whereas it was built into the Google ones. That's my personal preference.
Yeah, good point. I also use Google 99% of the time for that stuff, but it is possible.
Again, client requirements, right? Sometimes clients are a Microsoft shop. They want you to be using the same stuff. So yeah, you use it.
Yeah. Okay. So I often end up using live recording and annotation tools. So Tetra Insights is the one I mentioned before. There's also something called Look Back. There's some other ones, but it allows you to take notes and kind of do some tagging and stuff live, especially if you have observers. They a lot of times have some built-in capabilities so that there is some background chat that doesn't show up to the participant, because no matter how many times you remind people that everyone
chat.
Yes. Another thing that gets overlooked all the time is a booking and calendar tool like Calendly or Doodles, especially if you're scheduling one-on-ones or focus groups or dyads or triads or whatever you're doing, like a scheduling tool. for doing moderated research. I use messaging systems all the time, like Slack or Google Chats, or even just text messages to communicate with the rest of my team. I have often ended up using survey tools, and again, I have hacked them into doing all kinds of things. I very rarely actually write surveys anymore, but I use survey tools all of the time because it can be a useful way for you to kind of capture information and keep it collected. So there's, I think, a free version from Google Form. There's pretty low cost versions from things like SurveyMonkey. There's bunches of them. There are some really kind of method specific tools that I really like. So I use Optimal Sort for like card sorting and tree testing stuff. Hi, y'all.
You use them too, huh? Yeah.
Yes.
They seem to have really, they're a very user-centered company. They seem to really have understood what researchers need from it and what the participants need from the tool, which is why I still go back to them every time I want to run a card sort. They're one of the only ones in the space that's really good as a remote synchronous or asynchronous way of doing things. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. And they're super nice people. Hi, y'all. Miss you. Okay, so then there's some analytics tools like Hotjar or Appsy, depending on what you're trying to do. I've used Usability Hub a couple of times for like click tests or impression tests. I've used Dscout for diary studies. And some of these tools have integrating recruiting, but there are other. We could have a whole conversation about that. I feel very iffy, but I like doing live intercepts. I've used Ethnio for that. Yeah. And there's also, of course, recruiting platforms like Talk to My Customers or user interviews, that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of those.
It's interesting. I've always I've always kind of tended towards the more traditional recruiting companies where that part of it happens offline, because they tend to be buying lists and calling people who are actually really indicative of who that lot is, that group is, that sample is, rather than the ones who are already in the tools, who self-described and kind of are professional survey takers or professional usability testers.
Yeah, you've got to be careful about those for sure. I do find.
Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay.
I was going to say, it depends on how much money you've got to spend, because recruiting can cost a ton of money. You can spend a lot per participant if you're doing it through those traditional recruiters. Typically, my clients want to, but if you don't have that money, yeah, you can. If you've got a relatively generic, I guess is what you're going to say, something like more of a relatively generic sample.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, a relatively generic, and also you just have to be more careful. But I do find there are some online services that are specifically for recruiting that are a little bit better, I find, than the integrated recruiting that is in other tools. So, for instance, like L&E Research is a recruiting firm that is local to me. They have an online version that you can kind of do like self-serve. I have much better luck with them than I have with something like the panel that's a part of SurveyMonkey or something like that. So just use at your own risk, and just keep in mind that you're going to have to do some analysis of the data to make sure that it's legit and coming from good sources. And I highly recommend, whenever you recruit through any of those tools, adding some extra screening questions for quality control. So sometimes it can be as simple as things like, what's 2 + orange? And one of the answers is, that's not a real question, right? So the other thing is, just as a heads up, and I don't want to name names, but I used one of the online recruiting tools recently as I was testing it out. And one of the screening questions was, have you been a part of this project that I was working on? Because I wanted to see how frequently people responded. And as of yesterday afternoon, there were like 65 people who responded that, yes, indeed, they were part of that project. I didn't know any of them, which meant they weren't working on it. So just keep that in mind. You can get really great people, but you should be careful about that. And then tool-wise, I think that covers everything. I guess the only other thing that I would say is that there are some integrated platforms that have a lot of different options, like UserZoom. I think at this point, user testing, where you could do, like remote usability tests or unmoderated usability tests or click tests or surveys or whatever. They have some integrated options. However, I will say that I have never found any of those integrated platforms that have project-based or monthly pricing. They all seem to
Yeah.
be annual subscriptions. So just keep that in mind when you're assessing and kind of exploring.
And it may absolutely still be worthwhile to you to have that annual subscription, even if you're just going to use it for 1 month. Because if if you're doing a big piece of work and you need that tool set, and they're the only people, or they're the best people for you, it's
Absolutely.
worth it. It's the only. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be. Well, some of them can be a lot of money, but it's going to be a couple of $100, maybe. Maybe it could be more than that. But it could be. I mean, user Zoom and stuff is more than that. But
Yeah, much more.
much more. But like it could be worth it even for that one sesh, just to have that level of support from the tool. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, it may not be. And like I said, I'm a cheapskate and I tend not to use that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it just really depends what you need to get done, what your resources are, what you're trying to do. But I think that sorry, go for it,
You may
Chris.
even find that your organization already has a site license, but you don't know about it because you're not in the marketing department or whatever it is, the group that happened to be crazy enough to buy the license. So ask around if you're in a larger organization. I mean, ask around and just see, even call the company and say, hey, does my company X have an agreement with you already? And you might
Yeah.
find they do. And if they do,
Yeah.
awesome, use it.
Yeah,
Or
that's
if you're
a
working with a
super good
client,
point.
ask them to do the same thing. Or you could even call on your client's behalf and say, "Hey, company, hey, user Zoom, does this client company X have?" Yeah, they might not tell you. They shouldn't tell you, but they probably will. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never tried to do that, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I think kind of to recap, we of course will share some of the individual tools that we find most helpful, but I think that I can confidently speak for both Chris and I when we say focus on the skill sets over the tools, aim for simplicity. And regardless of what you do, make sure you're really familiar with it before you do something critical and live. Like, don't try to run a moderated usability test with a tool that you've never used before, because it doesn't set yourself
Bad
doesn't
things
doesn't
will happen.
yeah, it doesn't set you up well for success. So with all of that in mind, Chris, any final thoughts about tools?
No thoughts. My brain is empty.
Well, speaking of, I think that both of our brains might be empty because it is the end of 2020. Oh, thankfully. So this is our last Sticky Notes chat for the year. I think in the new year we're going to be experimenting with some new content, some new types of events. So as always, if you have any questions for Cory or Chris or myself, you can tag us. You can, you can email chat at stickynotes.chat. We will respond. We read all those emails. You can find each of us individually in LinkedIn, and you should follow all of us because we have to rotate who actually broadcasts the live stream. But follow any of us. You can tag us Sticky Notes Chat hashtag on LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can or you can reach out to us at Sticky Note Chats on Twitter, or you can go to our website, stickynotes.chat, which also has all of our past conversations. And so one thing that we have realized is that people a lot of times are asking us the same questions but about content that we already covered. So that's an awesome place to go check things out. So we're going to be adding some things there, some notes. We'll do things like post some of the tools that we were talking about here today so that we have everybody up to date. But in the meantime, Happy New Year, everybody. I hope that you have a great holiday season. Until next year, that's it. Bye,
Take
y'all.
care, everyone.